Hi, welcome to day 14 of our kind of shelter in place and confinement series. I want to start today and share with you a story that kind of is part of the birth of positive psychology. So Martin Seligman, who is really the founder or really started the movement in positive psychology and has written so much about flourishing and overcoming and resilience and how to survive, did some really groundbreaking research that was repeated when I was an undergraduate in college. And it had to do with how do people in any environment respond to chaos and stress. And so they were looking at post-traumatic stress from people coming home from war, battered spouses who are in abusive relationships. And the research centered around some rats. And what they did with the rats, now understand this kind of research I don't think is allowed to be done anymore, but these particular rats were put in a situation where their environment became random and chaotic. Basically, they were put in a situation where they would get shocked, and the initial training was aversion training. So they'd put food and water on either end of the cage, and if they ate from this side of the cage, nothing would happen. If they ate or drank from this side of the cage, they would be shocked. So the rat learned, right, conditioned behavior, good side, bad side, go here, don't go here. Once that was learned, they'd switch it, which created a little confusion. So the first time the rat goes to eat here and they get shocked, they're like, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? I thought this was the good side. But over time, there's consistency. They learn this is the good side, that's the bad side. Where we introduce a concept that Martin Seligman called learned helplessness comes in here, where now they set up the cage so that it was randomly going to shock the rats at various times, regardless of which side they're on and whether they were eating or not. And what happened was, when that randomness lasted for a prolonged period of time, they would eventually turn off all the electricity. So now the rat will not get shocked whether it eats or drinks, moves around, no matter what it does, there are no shocks. But what happened was the environment became so random, it became so chaotic, that the rats would literally lay down in the middle of the cage and die of starvation or of thirst, even though both of those resources were but a few steps away. In psychology, Martin Seligman called that learned helplessness. In other words, the randomness of the environment became so intense that these rats and their human counterparts learned to be helpless. When I first began working with battered women as a therapist, this is another thing that I noticed. Otherwise bright, intelligent, competent women who could not see opportunity, could not see a way out, could not see responses, even though resources were all around them. And so when this learned helplessness shows up, it shows up in what we call 3 Ps, or filters through which we see everything going on in the world and see if maybe a little of these Ps might be sneaking into your family, into your business, and into your life. The first is we begin to see problems, setbacks, or obstacles as permanent. That it's never going to be good again. We're never going to have toilet paper again. We're never going to be able to go back to work again. This is never going to end. And think about it, when you get sucked into the vortex, how many times have you started to feel this is permanent? Our kids are never going to go back to school. The country's never going to recover. We're never going to have anything go through. That's the first sign of learned helplessness, is when you start to see problems as permanent. The second P is pervasive. We start to see them in every area of life. I was sharing these ideas with a company that I was coaching, and that particular hospital group that I was working with was in the process of doing some downsizing, right-sizing kind of stuff. And one of the nurse managers that I was working with, as her coach, she said to me, Chris, I got to tell you, I am so frustrated. He goes, why? She said, I just came out of a staff meeting and they're going to reduce our FTEs, our full-time employees. And, I just was so frustrated, I decided, that's it. I'm just going to take a break and go to lunch. And I went to my favorite little Italian restaurant, little diner place that's right there by the hospital. And I love spaghetti and meatballs. Maybe it's my Italian heritage. And she said, and I ordered my meatballs and I looked down, and sure enough, 2 meatballs, not 3, and they are cutting back meatballs there. Chris, I swear cutbacks are going on everywhere. Do you ever start to see problems as pervasive? You start to see them in every area of your life. So if you have a negative experience in one area, you start to project that into every other area of your life. Now the last is where it's personal. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone come out of a staff meeting, or they come out of a little family dinner or get together, and they'll vent and they'll say, I knew it. They changed that policy just to get me. I brought this up 2 months ago in a strategic planning session, and now they're doing this just to punish me, just to get to me. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever had that goes on? We call that learned helplessness. You see problems as permanent, pervasive, and personal. Let me ask you a question. If you're in times of crisis and chaos where there's tons of uncertainty, I don't know, maybe like a COVID-19 pandemic, and you start to see the world and your problems in particular as permanent, pervasive, and personal, do you think that might affect your resourcefulness? You think that might affect your access to resources? Will it affect the clarity of your thinking? Will it affect your ability to solve problems? Yes, significantly. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do today, tonight, tomorrow, next week, next month, pay attention. Am I seeing things as permanent? Am I seeing them as pervasive? Am I seeing them as personal? Now, the second problem with that goes back to what I think is the second worst pandemic we have going on. There's a pandemic of COVID-19, but there's also a pandemic of negativity, of judgment, of depression, of anxiety that is sweeping the nation. It's going faster than I think the actual virus is spreading. Now, we've all talked about things that we need to do to wash our hands, wear a face mask, make sure you don't touch your face, have social physical separation so that you're physically distancing from other people. Can you imagine if we use those same precautions with spreading the virus of negativity? What if we washed our minds and we washed our hands of the negative every time? So if we're in one conversation that's negative, we wash our hands of the negative before we go to our next conversation. And we don't become a contagion of negativity in the same way you can become a contagion of the virus. What if we had a mask, a filter over everything that went out of our mouth, and we made sure, is this helpful? Is this useful? Or am I whining, being negative, complaining, bringing people down, venting, right? What if we had a mask of negativity so it prevented us from spewing negativity to those people around us and sucking other people into the vortex? One of the major challenges that almost every organization has, every family, every business, every country, community, is gossip. I cannot tell you how much when stress comes up, gossip goes out. So many companies tell me, listen, man, we don't have, we have a communication problem. I'm like, no, you don't have a communication problem. There's tons of communication goes on. Let me tell you something about every organization I've ever worked with. If you ever want to keep something a secret, put it in a manual. People will never find it. You want word to get out fast, you just release it in the break room. Everybody will know in 10 minutes, because if they're not there, they got text. See, there's communication going on, and the pipeline is full of communication. The problem is leadership and ownership have no control of what's in the pipeline. I was working on a global coaching project for about 5 years, and we had about 250 coaches that we were working with in 51 countries. And my partner in leading this effort was a great coach named Dolores Hazel. And can you imagine working with all those different cultures, all those different countries, and how often misunderstanding, miscommunication, and then gossip and things would come up? And I watched Dolores repeatedly. She did this so many times, I actually adopted this tool from her. And I share it with you, and I hope you will use it. People would come up to her from the French team and gossip about the German team. They would come up from the East Coast US team and gossip about the West Coast US team. Some complaint, and it was always negative, and there was always blaming, and whoever was talking was right, and whoever they were talking about was wrong. And Dolores would simply look and say, what would you like me to do with that information? Write this question down. It is one of the best things you can do. What would you like me to do with that information? Well, what no one will say is, well, what I really want you to do is I want you to go talk to those Germans and put them in their place and tell them not to do that. But they're not going to say that. But when you move it from like this parent-to-child conversation where the child is complaining to the mom to go fix it, to an adult-to-adult conversation where, well, what would you like me to do with that information? 9 out of 10 times what they would say is, well, I was just venting, or I just wanted to let you know, or I wanted to go, okay. Follow up. What are you going to do about that? Putting the ball back in their court. So if you find yourself at work or you find yourself at home feeling a lot of this gossip and stuff going on, what I'm going to ask you to do is use Dolores's beautiful tool. What would you like me to do with that information? Now, Third thing I'd like to share with you today is the power of assuming positive intent. When you get out of learned helplessness and you get back to an adult level in your communication and conversation, the most important thing you can do is assume positive intent. Your spouse is your partner. Your children love you. The people in the other departments at work actually have a shared vision and a common goal, and they really do care about you. When people show up anxious, nervous, afraid, accusing, blaming, condemning, gossiping, and undermining, assume positive intent. Their desire is to make things better. They may be inelegant. They may be frustrated. They may be in a very unresourceful state, and so they're showing up as the worst version of themselves. They aren't bad. I was having a conversation with one of my clients, and we were talking about this, and there was kind of concern about backdoor conversations and complaining and undermining. And I looked at him and I said, don't judge someone that's on your team, that's been on your team for 20 years, on the worst 10 minutes of their day. Okay? Assume positive intent. If they're showing up weak, if they're showing up poor, if they're showing up struggling, then what they really need are more resources, more help, more support, more love. Assume positive intent. They are saying this, they are doing this because they want to make things better. Find out the better they want to make. Go to the intent and not the delivery. If you focus on the delivery, then you're always going to be judging people and getting upset that they didn't show up as their best selves. If you focus on the intent and assume positive intent, if you're going to make up a story, make up a good story, not a bad story. I cannot tell you how many marriages are saved, how many relationships with children, especially teenage kids, are saved, how many just deals in business are saved simply because one person chose to assume positive intent, to step up. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do. If you find conversations devolving, you find relationships fraying and straining, you find yourself becoming distrustful, angry, wondering, questioning, and that starts to move you into this kind of negative space, which just sucks you right into learned helplessness. When you see that, stop, step back, breathe, and say, hey, wait a minute. How could I assume positive intent? What's the positive intent of this person in this situation with me right now? So use these, all right? Pay attention to learned helplessness. Use Dolores's golden question. What would you like me to do with this information? And use positive intent to repair relationships, bridge gaps, increase communication, and support and help and lift the people that are around you by seeing in them the good they can't even see in themselves and draw out of them the best of who they are. And those are the tools that are going to help you as we go through and build the kind of relationships you want both at home and at work.